The views expressed in this episode, as well as all episodes of Mystican Identity, are solely host opinions. The content here should not be taken as indisputable fact. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Welcome to Mystican Identity, the podcast that invites you to discover unity in every tradition. I'm Phoenix Kevlin, and in each episode we explore the timeless wisdom woven through mystic teachings, religions, and spiritual philosophies, all leading us to a deeper connection with one another. I've been compelled to change things up a little bit. I've been feeling lately that the reflections that I do of the perennial philosophy are helpful, and they're good, and they're a honest reflection of where I'm at right now with at least my studying material. What I'm finding to be a problem is that, well, it's really not reflective of me and my experience. It's very good educational material, but it's not really talking about my actual journey. And I more than likely will come back to reflecting on things like the perennial philosophy, but there's already stacks of material, which I find that as I go through it, I'm just doing my interpretation, which is starting to sound very similar to other interpretations. So it's kind of like, if you were to go to a place and you want to read a book that's based on somebody's reading of a book, that's based on somebody's interpretation of a book. And when it really comes down to it, I would really recommend that somebody just read Light on the Ancient Worlds by Frithjof Schuon. And he's like the original writer about the perennial philosophy, and you might as well just go to the source and get the goods, so to speak. So getting back to my personal experience, for example, this week, I was trained in transcendental meditation. And for anybody that's aware of transcendental meditation, it was a 4-day training. And I've already seen so many wonderful benefits that come from it. And I'd really like to share that instead of doing something like a book report. And going back even before the transcendental meditation training, I had a vision. And so what I'd like to do is just, I really want to share that it was a very deeply personal experience. It was very profound for me, and it shifted my understanding of things like life, the universe, and my place within it, which I thought just had a lot of value to share. And this isn't just another reflection based on the books that I've read or teachings that I've studied. This is what I would consider to be a mystical experience. It was really profound to me, and it was like this vision that opened a door to a deeper sense of interconnectedness, humility, truth, and I'd like to share it with you. And in this way, I'm getting away from a scripted material that I'm doing, and I'd like to invite you to join me on this journey as I recount this vivid experience that shaped my understanding of the world and ultimately my identity and my place within this physical plane meets spiritual experience. So it all began during a meditation where I found myself soaring high above the earth. And from my viewpoint, for anyone to picture how it looked to me, it was like those drone shots that was very smooth and slick and perfect and had a lot of clarity to it. And I was looking down at this endless expanse of trees. The landscape stretched for miles, and at first my mental interpretation was that it looked like just miles and miles of densely packed broccoli. I know that sounds kind of funny and comical, but first thing was just, my goodness, this looks like just miles of enormous, densely packed broccoli. Perhaps you've had the same kind of reflection when looking at maybe drone photos of densely packed trees. But then I noticed that amidst all the vibrant shades of green, there was also some yellow and orange hues, kind of like a big living tapestry. And from this vantage point, I started to realize how tiny I really was. And I just felt so small in comparison. I thought of my limited shell of a being in comparison to this blanket that seemed to go on without end. And it made me feel so young and inexperienced. These trees had seen more years than I, and souls like mine had come and go for a very long time. They had been here during enormous changes in history and geography that I can only read about in books. And I felt like in their silence and stillness, they were closer in understanding the true nature of connectedness to the divine than I do. And yet they weren't busy about it. They were just being. So from there was a still, small voice. If you notice how impatient you are and you rush through everything, you always want to just get done. Look at all this amazing life. Why do you want to rush through this? When you get done, you'll only wish that you had taken your time, but that time is now. Look at these trees. Think of how long it took them to get this enormous and dense, and their journey isn't even over yet. Do they rush? Do they want to get to the end? You are fascinated by their brilliance and full of awe, and yet by rushing through everything, you're denying yourself the chance to display that awe to others. And then it said, I want you to breathe this in. Take in all the sights without rushing for an end, because the end will never come. When you're at peace and relaxed, we'll explore how much deeper this goes. Well, it took some time for me to just relax and allow the view and the feeling of soaring take over. I got to a point where I was like what I would describe as in rhythm or in sync with this entire experience. I wasn't concentrating, like I was just being. It was then the voice said, good. Now we can take a look at those deeper layers, and with each step, don't rush, just be in rhythm with it. Don't allow yourself to slip out of rhythm. Stay with me. And from there, I dropped down toward the trees in a comfortable, smooth flow, and I wasn't afraid. I got closer to the trees, and as I did, the expanse of all of them seemed to get bigger and bigger and infinite, until I was settled in the top portion of one of the trees. I was standing on a limb and with my hands pressed up against the trunk, and the voice said, don't be afraid to look around, you'll be okay. So I let my hands go, and I wasn't afraid. I was very confident. I didn't lose my balance. I looked around, and as I did, I could only think of how I was amidst an enormous community. Everywhere I looked, there was this intense network of trees, all silent, swinging ever so slightly like a slow dance. And there was this occasional bold creaking, and it reminded me of an old wise man stating, as if he was considering a deep thought or remembering something. The voice then asked me to look very intensely at the tree and specifically to analyze its bark. So I just took a small portion, roughly about 4 to 5 inches long and 2 inches thick. The voice said, look at the grain of it and how it was all constructed of smaller geometric portions. Feel the texture with my fingertip and notice the dryness. So I did, and I really took mental notes, so to speak, of how it felt, but also noticed that there was a hint of moisture. Then it said, look down the trunk and take into consideration how many of those sections wrap the tree all the way down. and to take into consideration how this continued beyond the point where I still couldn't see the bottom where land began. And then the voice instructed me to look at the palm of my hand intensely. So I did, and immediately noticed how, other than the tone of my skin, I was composed of a similar design. Tiny geometric portions that all came together to form sections that wrapped my frame as well. In that moment, I realized that the point of this instruction was to see the connection between myself and the tree, and to stop just knowing it is alive, and to actually feel how it was alive, just like me, with consciousness, just a different form or type of consciousness, not better, not lesser, or any of that comparative type of thing, just a different type. I looked around again, and I was overwhelmed by the fact that the patterns were everywhere in this community that I was just visiting. But I noticed that these trees were made up of different species of trees. They all swayed together. Their differences were so intriguing, and I realized that I originally had thought that I was just surrounded by trees. And I suppose I assumed that they were all the same species. But now I saw how many different species there were, and they all collaborated to make this incredibly beautiful scene. And I asked myself, what is wrong with people? Like, why can we admire and honor many varieties of trees and be fascinated by how nature can have so many varieties? Different types of pets. You can have different types of dogs, different types of cats. There's different types of clouds in the sky. And yet, we criticize, critique, and some people even hate other people because they're different in appearance. So the still small voice directed me to look again at the tree I was resting on. "Did you miss anything?" it said. I took a moment and, yeah. I had missed something to consider. There were tiny, tiny insects within the cracks of the bark and on the bark. In fact, there were a few examining my hand, and I hadn't noticed. "Good," the voice said. Then it said, "Take a moment to reflect on their community. They have things to do. They have a schedule. They have a community they are responsible to. They even reproduce. They have consciousness. Think as long as you'd like about it before we move on." I understood it. I had this strong realization about it. But the thought was so enormous for me to comprehend fully, because I then understood that I was only grasping this from the small section I was looking at. There was still the rest of this one tree, then the other tree, then the multitude of other trees. And as I did this, the next part really blew my mind. The voice said, "Now remember those cracks and patterns that make up your skin? There are tiny microscopic bugs on your skin, just like the bugs on this tree, all with a purpose and all with a community." So I let that soak in for a little while. And once it did, from there I was taken to ground level, and I could feel the mud underneath my feet all gushy and gooey and uneven. And yet again, I was aware of how tiny I was again. I did like a 360. I circled about, and I took in all the sounds of birds, rustling in the leaves from something smaller and hidden. There was a deer in the distance. But it was like my consciousness was tuned into the fact that there were countless life forms all around me, from ants to the deer, and there was a woodpecker that was tapping, which made this echoey clack-a-clack-a-clack sound. And I was aware that these life forms had their own purpose, motivations, concerns, routines, just like me. I live day to day thinking the world is on my shoulders. Did they feel the same about their lives? I felt certain that they didn't. I felt like they understood the whole interconnectedness of things far better than I, and at that moment I actually felt ashamed. Because I could sense that they had their own happiness, fear, responsibilities, just like me. But from my lens, everything is just important within my own experience and perspective, and I just felt so ashamed that I had gone so long with this point of view. From here, I was aware that the vision was about to wrap up. The still small voice said, "You've taken in a lot to be aware of, and we could stay here to explore the vastness of this experience. But with all you've experienced now, there's just one more thing for you to consider before you go." From there, it didn't take me, but allowed me to see underground. And I was overwhelmed that just as much that was above was also below. And I was overwhelmed that there was this intricate network beneath the surface, weaving together, looking very much like the synapses and the neurons of the human brain, communicating in ways I couldn't understand. And there were insects, too, small but significant, each with its own role in this subterranean metropolis. It was life, operating in complete harmony beneath my feet, invisible yet essential. Everything was connected. Just as life thrived above the ground, it thrived below as well, each part working together to maintain the balance of nature. And this network stretched for miles, but also not just out, but the depth that it went down was beyond my comprehension. It became so clear to me in that moment that even with this vision, I hadn't even begun to understand the fullness of life. I hadn't even begun to consider oceans, lakes, rivers, the creatures beneath the earth. There's so much life I'll never see or even fully comprehend. Yet it all exists in this vast, interconnected dance. And in that moment, I had a revelation. My ego, the material concerns, the sense of urgency I had been living with, all of it seemed so small, so tiny, unimportant. And I'd been living with this inflated sense of importance all this time, as if my priorities and my ego were like the most vital thing in the universe. But in the face of this interconnected web, it was completely obvious that my ego is nothing but this tiny little speck in the grandness of life. And maybe, instead of seeing myself as part of the most advanced species, I began to wonder, are we really the most advanced, or are we simply the most ignorant and egocentric? Now, that's kind of tough to think about and to be honest with. As I came out of the vision, I was left with a profound sense of humility and this deep desire to share this experience. Now, it forced me to think of the fact that very, very often, historically speaking, up until, I woke up, that I often thought of my world as like the center of the universe, which is easy for anybody to do because really we look at anything through our lens. Everything that we look at is outside of us. And really, the man has built up the world with such chaos and distractions that it's tough to get a moment to have reflection upon the fact that this lens is also happening with everything else through that being's lens. I often think that my concerns and my struggles are the most important thing the things that I'm constantly rushing through to get to the end so I can move on to the next thing. But in truth, we're just one part of this much larger living system. And I know it's obvious, and as I say this, I know it's obvious, but to really take it in and digest it has a lot of passion behind it. So I encourage us all, as you listen to this episode, we should reflect on our own lives. What is it that drives us? What is it that we prioritize? Can we step outside? Can we step outside the confines of our own egos and embrace this larger, interconnected web of life? Can we, as humans, learn to live with the humility and understanding that nature and all its creatures already embody? And this experience afterwards got me remembering back to when I was younger. And there was this summer camp that I'd go to, and there was this little creek that would divide the younger camp from the older camp and all the other sections. And in this creek, it was like, I still remember just the light sound of the water moving and just kind of passing around rocks and moving through things. And I loved going to this creek because there were salamanders. And as an adult, I got thinking about this experience again, and I would love to just hold a salamander. Never ever kept one. I'd always put it back. But I got thinking about just the small intricacies. Like, it had little wrinkles, and these tiny dark eyes, and it just had this energy and this life happening all on its own. And as I thought about this, I remember when I'd put one back, it was part of a larger community of other cute little salamanders. And I remember that as a kid, I would look at it with the fact that it was cute, that it was an adorable little creature. But as an adult with this experience now, and I reflect back on that, I think that salamander has a purpose. There's a reason for it. Amongst all the other elements of that campground that I hadn't even considered. Like I said, I know it's obvious, but I feel like it's important for us to really just take some moments and reflect on the fact that, like the trees, the insects, and the creatures all around us, and then start considering life in the oceans and everywhere else, we too are part of something much larger than ourselves. And I'm hoping that in that realization, we find true peace. We embrace the interconnectedness of all life. So I'm just going to keep it short today. I thought it would be neat to just share this little vision. And I really, really appreciate that you joined me today on this journey. And I hope it's inspired you to reflect on the bigger picture and to help live with a sense of unity, humility, and love for the world around you. And originally, when I had done this podcast, I was set out to do an episode every week. And up till now, I feel like it's been a little bit of a detriment to being authentic. It's just that I'm rushing for quantity and not quality. And I feel like the authenticity is suffering because of that. And I'd like to put forward that, especially after my transcendental meditation training, that I'm actually feeling that my perspectives of things, what I want to talk about, the way I talk about it, I'd rather just be led by the beloved to put these things together and share a mystical experience, because I really feel like that's more honest. I'd still like to do one every week, but it will all rely on just the natural breath of things and how the experience comes in and the time to let it out. So thank you for joining me on this exploration of Mystican identity, where we uncover the unity within every tradition. And I hope today's journey inspired a sense of connection with the shared tapestry of spiritual wisdom. And as we reflect on these insights, please remember what unites us at our core. And if today's episode resonated with you, be sure to subscribe and share it with others on a similar path. So join me next time as we continue to uncover the wisdom that binds us all. And I wish you and your loved ones all the best. Have yourselves a wonderful experience. Bye-bye. Music by Timur Hasan.